Here we go. All right. So as I was saying before I started this talk, I was an hour and a half ago still cutting because there was so much material. And what I based it on is what's boring to me. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to get through to make the points that I want to make. But I wanted to only give you inspiration and uplifting thoughts. So it is a little bit long, but I've cut it a lot. So just bear that in mind. So the name of today's talk is Hold Yourself Accountable for Every Thought. And it is number 8 in the series, What Are You Feeding Yourself Spiritually? The song was Energy Follows Thought by Willie Nelson. So the book that we're concentrating on is called Thoughts Are Things. It is by Prentice Mulford. I will talk to you a little bit about who he is. We're going to be talking about quotes versus scripture. So I will be able to compare them easily, very easily. We will be talking about what reality are you creating for yourself? That is a talk that was given by Isaac Lidsky. So thoughts are things, and it's what we focus on that gets bigger. I am not in any way advocating pretending that you are feeling things. I encourage genuine, authentic sharing and then letting go. So when we talk about the fact that you are accountable for every thought and that I want you to focus on the positive, I am not saying erase the negative. I'm saying acknowledge the negative, work through any pain or any struggles you're going through, and then let it go. And put all your focus on the positive. So we do have the choice of what we focus on, but there are a lot of new thought people that are like, don't hold any negative thoughts in your mind. And I'm kind of in a place that we need to be balanced. So we need to acknowledge any thoughts that come that are negative or any painful situations that we're going through, and then let them go, because we do have the choice about that. So this book talks about 2 different realities. The reality that is based on the perception of what is happening according to our senses, and the reality that is a different way to look at life from the spiritual point of view, that there are infinite possibilities. And so we're always going to be focusing on the positive and growing and stretching and leaning towards those infinite possibilities. We have been trained as a culture to see only with our eyes. But if you pay attention, you can recognize your own distortions. We're going to be talking about that, and choose to think of more positive, hopeful, God-powered outcomes. So who was Prentice Hall? Prentice Hall was born 1839. He lived until 1891. He is considered to be a New Thought pioneer. He was born in Sag Harbor, Long Island. He is described as the strangest of men. And I have to tell you, I actually bought the book and read every single page of the book a couple of times. And there are some parts of him, he is a little bit odd. He did not ever have a family. He was a loner. He was very much by himself. He envisioned airplanes before they came and radio, and he prophesied mental telepathy, and he used that. At the age of 22, he went to California, and he was a gold miner and a cook and a school teacher, but he actually made most of his money writing books and writing articles. He was a fixture in the San Francisco literary circles. He hung out with some of his friends were people like Mark Twain and Bret Harte. He was considered part of the bohemian set of the 1860s. So in 1865, he became interested in the mental and spiritual phenomenon. He lived on an old whaleboat all by himself in the San Francisco Bay. And then he came back over this coast or to that coast again, the East Coast again, and he lived as a hermit in Passaic for 17 years. He wrote his finest works on mental spiritual laws, including what is called the White Cross Library. You can Google White Cross Library. They're all PDFs. You can download them. And I mean, I think it was $2 to download it. It's not expensive at all, but you can download those books. And he talked about thought currents. So his biggest contribution was that there are thought currents, and that the currents of our thoughts are just as real as air currents and water currents. So he talked about how to use the thought currents. He was not well read. He learned everything he learned from nature, and he does talk a lot about nature in his books. He was a teacher, and he was very encouraging of others to find their own truths. He said, in the spiritual life, everyone is his or her own spiritual discoverer. And you need not grieve if your discoveries are not believed in by any others. It is your business to push on, find more and more, and increase your own individual happiness. At the age of 57, he decided to return to Sag Harbor on his boat. He passed away peacefully on his boat. He was found later, he had passed away. After 30 years, he was in an unmarked grave for 30 years. They found his body and it was taken to a cemetery in Sag Harbor. And he had asked that the words on the stone say, "Thoughts are things." So that's what it is. The books that he's known for are Thoughts Are Things, Your Forces and How to Use Them, The Gift of Understanding, Prentice Mulford's Story, The Gift of the Spirit, and Thought Forces Essays. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Thoughts Are Things. It was written in 1908. I'm pulling from a commentary that was written by a professor, a law professor named Professor George Mentz, who wrote conclusions at the end of this chapter, and he actually rephrased it so that it was more modern English so that people could understand it more. There were 13 chapters. I originally had pulled from all 13, but then it got tedious and there was a lot of other information. So I've narrowed it down to a couple that I thought would be really, really helpful for you. The very first one is the material mind versus the spiritual mind. Every human has a higher self and a lower self, the self or mind of the spirit and the self of the body. We need to focus on cooperation of self with the spirit and, quote, clear ourselves on the inside to make room for the great good and peace that can fill our souls with the constructive spirit energy. So number 2 is, who are our relations? He does talk quite a bit about family and about how family puts a whole lot of belief systems in us, which may or may not be true. But then he talks about, as an adult, you choose the people that you hang around with, and the people that you hang around with have a huge influence on you. They create what he calls a thought atmosphere that is emanating from them. Be very careful whom you surround yourself with. He talks about parental emphasis. Choose better influences now that you're an adult. If we associate with like minds of spiritual nature, we can excel. Learn to be the best by associating with the best, he says. The next is this whole concept of thought currents. So thought currents, he says, thought runs in currents as real as those of the air and the water. Of what we think and talk, we attract to us like currents of thought. This acts on the mind or the body for good or for ill. This is a quote. Let us endeavor then, with the help of the supreme power, to get into thought current of things that are healthy, natural, strong, and beautiful. Professor Mentz talked about this and says that thoughts are things we think, therefore we are. What you think is emitted and set out from you. Your thoughts attract like thoughts. We know that. Be very specific in your petitions and desires. You are a magnet for higher good and for the perfect good. Next is one way to cultivate courage. So he says courage and the presence of mind are the same thing. So the presence of mind implies the command of the mind, your ability to control your thoughts. All degrees of success are based on courage, mental or physical. All degrees of failure are based on timidity. So timidity is just another word that he uses for fear. Fear is another name for lack of power, he says, to control our minds, to control the kind of thoughts that we think or put out. And Professor Mentz said, the courage to think what you want and to take action towards what you want is an ultimate power. Visualization and mental planning use our mind toward today's goals and missions. The next is looking forward. He has a whole chapter about the fact that you should not think about the past at all, that you should move forward. So spirit cares relatively little for its past. We need to fasten our thought on life and increasing life that is not gained by looking backward. Look forward. Nothing in nature goes backward. A giant, incomprehensible force and wisdom moves all things forward toward greater and higher powers and possibilities. Professor Mentz says you must make the proper use of your spiritual and emotional energy. If we live in the past and dwell on what is wrong, then our present energy is used up in favor of the ills of the past. Do not blame your past for anything. Your body and mind can be renewed with continual spiritual and metaphysical forces. Next is God in the trees, or the infinite mind in nature. So he talks a lot about nature. He's really, as I had said before, he didn't do his learning through books. He did his learning from watching nature and watching how it changed. And he says, this is a quote, "You are fortunate if you love trees, and especially the wild ones growing where the great creative force placed them. For all the things we call wild or natural are nearer the infinite mind than those which have been enslaved, artificialized, and hampered by man. When you are in the midst of what is wild and natural in the forest or the mountains, where every trace of man's work is left behind, you feel an indescribable exhilaration and freedom that you do not realize anywhere else. The tree is a part of the infinite mind, even as you are. It is one of the all-pervading mind's myriads of thoughts. Communion with nature is something far above a sentiment. It is a literal joining with the infinite being. So Professor Mentz talks about, he states that if we get the element of love only in proportion, so he says you can feel love by being out in nature and being attached to the infinite spirit. We have it in us. Thus, love is the quality of thought and emotion that will propel us into peace of mind and great success. Focus on the good, the best, the constructive, and the beauty of life. See the best in all there is. Think of how you have been blessed, protected, and guided throughout your life. Happiness, peace, and success may be yours if you stay on the path of spiritual abundance. Next, he talks about the God in yourself. As a spirit, you are part of God, or the infinite force, or spirit of good. As such part, you are an ever-growing power, which can never lessen and must always increase. Every struggle of the mind against pain, appetite, more skill in doing anything, greater advancing in any art or calling is an actual pushing of the spirit to greater power and greater relative completion of yourself. And with that completion, you will feel happiness. Professor Mentz says, Mulford states, all things are possible with God. God works in and through you. We are all parts of the infinite power, carrying us to higher, finer, happier grades of being. God is your partner in life. If you join forces through cooperation with the higher spirit, you will believe only good is possible, and faith will be increased. Impossible is a simple response to what others have forced you to believe. Next is immortality in the flesh. So there were a lot of people back then, and going forward, Charles Fillmore was one of them, that believed if you become spiritually connected enough, your actual body will not die. And so he says the physical body can be retained so long as the spirit desires to use it, and that this body, instead of decreasing in strength and vigor as the years go on, will increase, and its youth will be perpetual. Sickness is a spiritual process for getting rid of the old, worn-out elements. We believe it to be bad. We think that the sickness gets worse. He said, if you could believe that regeneration of the new is coming, but first there has to be destruction of the old, you could build new bodies and you could live longer. He compares this to Columbus, who said, everyone told him obviously there was no new world, but he was certain that there was in his existence of the new continent. He believed in the idea, it was greater than his time. So what he talks about is you can have ideas in your brain that nobody else believes in, and you may just be ahead of your time. And one of his ideas about being ahead of your time is that your body doesn't have to die. Professor Mentz says, thy faith had made thee whole. Do you believe all good things are possible? Can your thinking be transformed through higher thought? Approach things as if they were possible. Allow yourself to change for the better. The next is the accession of new thought. New thought is new life. Life is a continual advance forward. A mighty, eternal, and incomprehensible force pushes us all forward. Whatever the mind is set upon, or whatever it keeps most in view, that is what it will be bringing out. When we realize we can be and do think ourselves into whatever we are as regards to health, wealth, and position, we realize also that we have found in ourselves the pearl of great price. Life is eternal in the discovery and realization of great joy. Professor Mentz says, new thinking is possible. Try to not complain for a whole day. Try to stop blaming. Quit making excuses for not doing what you desire. Your thoughts and character can be reinvented. You can be reborn. Our thought is unseen magnet, ever attracting its equal in things seen and tangible. All right, so I've pulled some quotes. So we're going to have quotes first from Mulford and then quotes from the Bible. So he says, you can commence the unloading process now by resolving, with the aid of the supreme power, to fling off the remembrance of everything in the past that has annoyed you, everything you regret, everything that you have mourned over. And Isaiah 45:18 says, forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Philippians 3:13, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead, I press on to reach the end of the race. Mulford says, God never mourns or regrets. You as a spirit are made in his image. God is eternal, life, joy, and serenity. The more of these characteristics you reflect, the nearer you are to the infinite spirit of God. John 4:14, but whoever drinks of the water I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Mulford says, power comes of looking forward with hope, of expecting and demanding the better things to come. That is the law of the infinite mind. And when we follow it, we live in that mind. Romans 15:13, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit, you may always abound in hope. Mulford says, love is an element which, though physically unseen, is as real as air or water. It is an acting, living, moving force, and in that far greater world of life all around you, of which physical sense is unaware, it moves in waves and currents just like the ocean. 1 Corinthians 13:13, so now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Colossians 3:14, and above all those, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. All right, I'm going to skip on to another page. There is a lot more quotes, and if you want them, I can leave them for you in my email, but we're running a little late, so I want to keep going forward. I want to move on to this talk that is called What Reality Are You Creating for Yourself by Isaac Lidsky. So Isaac Lidsky is a corporate speaker, an actor, an entrepreneur, and an author. And his quote, his mantra is, your life isn't happening to you, you create every moment. And the name of his book is Eyes Wide Open. So he says, when Dorothy was a little girl, she was fascinated by her goldfish. And her father explained that fish swim by quickly wagging their tails to propel themselves through the water. Without hesitation, Dorothy responded, yes, Daddy, fish swim backwards by wagging their heads. In her mind, it was a fact. She believed it. Our lives are full of fish swimming backwards. Assumptions that we make, faulty logic, biases that we harbor, fear that the worst will come, that we strive for unattainable perfection. We tell ourselves all the time what we can and cannot do, and we don't see our mistaken beliefs. So he then told 5 facts about himself, and he said, I'm going to tell you these 5 facts, and you tell me which one of them you think is not true. Well, it turned out they were all true. He lost his sight to a rare genetic disease, but he was standing in front of anybody. He had not been led onto the stage. His eyes looked totally normal because he had had vision until he was in his teens, and he didn't have a cane or anything. At that point, he pulled out a cane and he held onto the cane, and he explained that he had a rare genetic eye disease that had left him 100% blind. But he says that we struggle with that truth about blindness because we make assumption about disabilities. He says, going blind taught me to live my life eyes wide open. It taught me to spot backward swimming fish that our minds create. At age 12 to 25, the retina progressively deteriorated. He said it was a life of seeing mirrors and illusions, funhouse distortions everywhere. It was exhausting and difficult. He said, I learned that what we see is not universal truth. It is not objective reality. What we see is a unique, personal, virtual reality, masterfully constructed by our brain. The visual cortex takes up 30% of the brain. 8% of it is touch, and 2 to 3% of it is hearing. So sight is 1/3 of the brain's volume, and it claims 2/3 of the brain's processing resources. That's why the illusion of sight is so compelling. Make no mistake about it, he says, sight is an illusion. What you see impacts how you feel, and the way you feel literally changes what you see. If you were asked to determine the walking speed of a man in a video, the answer would be different if you were asked to think about a cheetah or to think about a turtle. A hill appears steeper if you're just exercised, and a landmark is further away if you're wearing a heavy backpack. What you see is a complex mental construction of your own making, but you experience it passively as a direct representation of the world around you. So what you see, you think is literally real, but it is actually not literally real at all. He says, you create your own reality and you believe it. The deterioration of his eyes shattered that illusion. The sight is one way we create reality. We do it many other ways. Your fears also distort your reality. Under the warped logic of fear, anything is better than the unknown. Fear fills the void at all costs, passing off what you dread for what you know, offering up the worst case scenario versus the ambiguous one, substituting assumption for reasoning. Fear replaces the unknown with the awful. When you face the greatest need to think critically, fear drowns your capacity for critical review with a flood of disruptive emotions. When you face the chance to take action, fear causes you to do nothing, telling you to passively watch. Your fear prophecies fulfill themselves. He says when he was diagnosed with his blinding disease, he knew blindness would ruin his life. He said it was a death sentence for his independence. It would be the end of his achievement. He would live an unremarkable life, small and sad and likely alone. He said he just knew that that would be the case. He said that was fiction, born of his fears, but he believed it. It was a lie. If he had not confronted the reality of his fear, he would have lived it. So, how do you live your life wise open? It is a learned discipline, and it can be practiced. Hold yourself accountable for every moment, every thought, every detail. See beyond your fears. Recognize your assumptions. Harness your internal strength. Silence your internal critic. Accept your strengths and your weaknesses. Open your hearts to your bountiful blessings. Your fears, your critics, your heroes, your villains, they are your excuses and rationalizations. They are fictions that you perceive as reality. Choose to see through them and choose to let them go. You are the creator of your own reality. With that empowerment comes a responsibility. He says he chose to step out of fear into the undefined territory. He chose to build a blessed life. He now has a wife and 3 kids and is CEO of a very large construction company down in Florida. He says, what do you fear? What lies do you tell yourself? How do you embellish your truth and write your own fiction? What reality are you creating for yourself? So here's what I know. A lot of you know that Diana Nyad is one of my heroes. I did a talk on Diana Nyad way long time ago. Like it was actually in CCNT when Blaine was still alive. So it was a long time ago. I absolutely adore Diana Nyad. I read everything about her. I've watched all her interviews. And so all of you know who she is. She's a swimmer. She did 111 miles from Cuba to Florida at age 64, 53 hours nonstop, an epic feat of endurance and human will. She said that there are 3 messages that she got out of that. 1, never, ever, ever give up. 2, you are never too old to chase your dreams. And 3, it looks like it's a solitary sport, but it's actually a team effort. For 35 years, she had tried to do this, and then she stopped. She had had 4 failures. She had a mantra that she now lives by called Find a Way. She had stopped for 30 years. It's now a movie. It's on Netflix. I haven't seen it. I don't have Netflix, but it's now a movie on Netflix. And she said she did what everybody said was impossible. So she had hired this huge big team of scientists and swimmers and Olympic people, and all of them said it's not possible, it's not possible. And she kept, her mantra was find a way. She pushed herself past every physical obstacle that her body was giving her, and every obstacle of the physical reality of being out in the ocean. The big thing you've probably heard about is the box jellyfish. So she got bitten by box jellyfish and they sucked the poison out of her, and she literally was dying right there in the water. And they shot her full of adrenaline and everything to keep her going. And she also was the only person to ever do this without a shark cage. So this is the embodiment of what Prentice Mulford teaches. Live in two realities: what you see physically and what you set your mind and your heart to do. While reading the book many times, this is a head up in the clouds stuff. It's not real, I said to myself. It talks about the body not dying, and that's very hard for me to understand. Fillmore talked about that too. If we progress enough spiritually, we can overcome all of the earthly barriers. I started this talk by saying I didn't want to preach any Pollyanna. So Pollyanna for me means you won't accept yourself to have any negative thoughts in your mind. You're smiling all the time. You're always being positive and cheerful and happy, and you don't ever acknowledge anything negative. I'm not preaching that. I'm not in any way saying that as a mode of being. It's not about pretending. It's not about constantly smiling and living in a fake reality. It's about accepting what is real and sharing it and letting it go. So I think most of you in this room know that in January, I was diagnosed with COPD. And I had a flare last week, and I, having not had a flare before, didn't know what was happening. It started out with a sore throat, and I thought I had a really sore throat. And then the cough came, and I started taking cough medicine, and I started taking flu medicine, and nothing helped. Nothing made it better. So those of you who saw me by Thursday, I had lost my voice totally. Tuesday, I had no voice at all. I couldn't talk at all. And so what happens when you have a COPD flare is that the cough is because of there are fibers in your lungs that are becoming inflamed, and they're filling up your lungs, making it harder and harder to breathe. So you're tired all the time, you're coughing all the time, and it's really scary because even just making up the bed, I would get out of breath. And I woke up at 2:30 in the morning one day, and I thought I had to go to the hospital. I could not stop coughing, and I could not breathe. And I eventually, by that time, I had started my inhaler, because I do have an inhaler. And I was like, oh, this isn't a cold, this is COPD. But having never had a flare before, I didn't know that. So I realized it was COPD. I obviously talked to my doctor, and my doctor put me on track and said, you know, you can use your inhaler every 4 hours. If the inhaler isn't working, we can get you a stronger inhaler. And she said, Lucretia, you have to understand C, the first letter of COPD, is chronic. And so my best friend, you all heard me talk about my best friend in New Jersey. And so I called my best friend, and as soon as I heard his voice, I just started crying. And I was like, this is never going to go away. This is never going to go away. Not only is it not ever going to go away, it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And not only that, but she says from now on in, whenever you get a cough, you immediately start the inhaler. Don't even play with it. Don't even think about it. And she told me all these things to do. And now that I understand what a flare is, I will treat it differently. I really genuinely didn't know. But it dawned on me that this is real. And this is a disease I will have for the rest of my life. And this disease is going to come and go. I thought that there would going to be, the way she had described it, oh, you'll go through a year and you'll be fine. And then you might have a flare up and it'll go away and then you'll be fine. But now what she's saying is you're at a place now where it's progressing and you're going to have to fight it all the time. And so you're going to have to be aware that when your breathing is hard, you need to lie down or you need to stop doing what you're doing. And she gave me all of this list of stuff. And when I talked to him, I just started crying, and because he's my best friend. And so all of that to say that it is really important that we live in the real world. I'm not in any way saying you pretend that everything is fine, that you pretend that everything is good, that you pretend, you don't put on this fake front that, oh my God, my life is great. Yes, my life is great. And yes, I love everything about my life. And yes, I love my job. And yes, I love all you guys. And I love my friends. And I love my home. But there's some little blips in the road every once in a while. And that's just all part of reality. But the reality is what I also realized, you talk about it. If you need to cry about it, you cry about it, you share about it, and then you move on. And then you change your focus. And then you change your focus to, what do I need to do differently? What do I need to pay attention to? How do I need to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or that I see it coming faster? You change your focus. We do have the ability to do that. So Prentice Mulford says we should strive to always be growing and reaching higher spiritually. And so we can see the infinite possibilities, that we should not base our lives on what we see with our eyes, but what we see spiritually. And so what I came to is I really believe it's a balancing act between doing both. I think we need to stay grounded in reality and not be a Pollyanna, not put on a happy face all the time, having a balance between the seen, what you're actually seeing, and the unseen, which is their spiritual connection. Diana Nyad teaches us we can stretch ourselves very far out of our comfort zones, and that we are not limited by what we or anyone else has done before. We can be better, stronger, smarter, more loving, more generous, more daring, and have more resilience every day as we grow in our relationship with God. For me, all of my strength and courage comes from God, and I'm only able to do what I do because I ask for his help over and over and over again. I believe in spiritual growth. I believe that it comes in baby steps, one day at a time. We stretch a little, grow a little more, and balance that out with rest and patience and hope. Love from God comes in the shape of other people, and being vulnerable and sharing our fears and our pain are part of the process. They give us strength to move forward. And I believe it is our responsibility to watch the words out of our mouth and the stories that we tell, because we do create our own realities by what we think and by what we tell people. I have learned to be careful with my words. They really do matter. Be honest, be authentic and real, and tell the truth. But put more attention on hope and joy and fulfillment and your dreams for the future than you do on your fear. It's all about what you focus on. I think the power is given us to watch our words and hold ourselves accountable for every single thought. And so it is. Remember at all times, the power is in you. It always has been, and it always will be.